Hey, what's up, mortals? It's Miggy Sawdust here, and welcome to What If Deku Had a Luck Quirk, Part 1. Just wanted to greet you all by just saying, sit back and relax. You're in for a treat. And so we begin. Silence. Silence is the deafening lack of noise that is noise. It is the loudest of noises one can hear, as there are no other competing sounds to disperse what is perceived to be silence. It is a world of just either complete darkness or blinding light, a space where only one exists and nothing is balanced. This is the world that Izuku Midoriya, aged 14, has lived in his whole life. Time ticked forward like an unending stream, and the teenager could do nothing but continue forward in his still and silent world. He had to keep struggling and fighting, with that day not an exception. Even when the sound of his classmates' cheers rumbled around like a riptide, the freckled one didn't make a single sound from where he sat. He wasn't close to anyone at all, and that was an understatement. But when a certain blonde stood on his desk, the Greenette's attention silently turned around. Their teacher had just told everyone that Bakugo was applying to UA, and the boy just scoffed before announcing a speech out of nowhere. Katsuki Bakugo, an older boy who was also 14, was known as a rash and bold student who had the personality of a human grenade with its pin pulled. His arrogant talk was no surprise to anyone either, as his fearless behavior was unchecked by even the teachers. But there was also another thing that the blonde was known for. I see another person is entering for UA too. Good luck to you then. The teacher searched for who else had applied for the prestigious school when he paused awkwardly. Midoriya? Silence echoed out as if the name was taboo, and not a single student stirred from their seat. It was as if time had stopped, and no one could react to what the teacher had said. An unavoidable nothingness. A quiet that was deafening. An air of discomfort where everything suddenly seemed bleak when, like splintering glass, the sound of Bakugo slamming his feet on the desk shattered the void of noise, and time seemed to catch its breath again. What happened next was filled with rushed whispers as the end of school bell rang, causing the students to quickly leave the disturbing classroom. The teacher also scurried off quickly, grabbing his sheets as he did, and left the room to only 2 people. This was when the other trait Bakugo was known for came to light. Ignore what the old bastard said, Izuku. The blonde had known the freckled teen for his whole life, and the brunette was the only one who he addressed by a first-name basis. Even though they seemed close, there was no verbal reaction from the other. Instead, shaking fingers made a desperate grab for a notebook nearby, and immediately the pages were violently flipped open. Within seconds, a sporadically moving pen wrote anything and everything that came to mind about the Greenette's own quirk, all while the pair of knitted eyebrows furrowed deeper than ever. To a stranger, it would seem that the freckled one was a narcissist, or just extremely curious about his own power. But Bakugo knew better, and sighed. He leaned against his childhood friend's desk and spoke loudly. Don't you still want to be a hero? The silence that answered him lingered in the air, as the boy before him slowed down, hands clenching around the pen tightly. As the seconds ticked by, the expressionless face began to change, only to reveal a broken look. There was not even a fragment of the once cheery kid Bakugo thought he had grown up with. The person before him was nothing but an empty shell, who could only just barely react to the sound of his own voice. The moment passed, and Izuku finally registered the question before talking. Of course. His voice, which was rarely used, came out naturally, and the blonde sighed before grinning. It was okay. Nothing had changed. Their intentions were still clear, and that was all that mattered. Izuku closed the notebook and quietly placed it in his bag, zipping the compartment closed before slinging it over his shoulders. I'm not giving up being an underground hero like All Might. He clenched his fist and Bakugo quickly opened the classroom door, guiding his friend out.
Then let's get back and study. I'll kill you if you fail Yue's written exam.
There was a small nod before the greenette silently left the room, and the blonde glanced over the broken pen on the boy's desk. No one but him knew the real reason behind his friend's notes, which was why the blonde acted the way he did. The notebooks were filled completely with the teenager's desire, and it wasn't that Izuku loved his own quirk. In fact, it was the complete opposite, and that would be an understatement. Izuku Midoriya, for the past decade that he lived possessing his power, had absolutely hated every second of his life. The two boys walked in silence, and students quickly went out of their way to avoid the boys and let them pass. This was the norm for Aldera Junior High, since everyone, including the teachers, knew what happened if they stood too close. It was honestly ironic, considering what Izuku's quirk was called. But because of it, the greenette was nothing but the bringer of eerie tranquility. The boys continued down the empty street, and Bakugo had to occasionally catch the wild newspaper that came crashing into his face. He was used to it, but today seemed to have more than the usual, as the blonde ended up holding 8 of the papers by the time they had reached the bridge. Annoyed, the human grenade burnt it all to a crisp in an angry explosion, causing Izuku to turn around. It used to be that only inconveniences barely bothered the blonde, and the greenette suddenly paled at the thought. Was his quirk getting stronger? It didn't seem too different than usual, so he quickly calmed himself down, but now worry plagued his already tainted mind.
Oi, Izuku! You're overthinking again. It was just a shitty paper.
Bakugo's words were rough but kind, and the greenette quickly snapped out of his muddled thoughts. He nodded again before glancing at the bulky ashes that fell out of his friend's hands. They were as charred and black as his mind, and the freckled one didn't like the feeling he got when looking at the mess. Out of annoyance, he swept the mess into the gaps of a manhole by his feet and swiftly trudged away without turning back. The human grenade glanced down at the jumble of litter and could roughly guess what went through his friend's head. He hated it. Whether it was pride or not, Bakugo just didn't like the fact that he was powerless to do anything. The boy kept staring at the ashes he made when a weird sound started to approach. It was as if something was sliding closer and closer when...
Perfect! A skin suit!
Izuku immediately turned around at the sound of an explosion, and his face twisted in fear when he saw Bakugo entangled in a giant green sludge. The blonde was one of the only people who even spoke to him anymore, and at the thought of losing him, the greenette didn't know what to do. His stagnant world started to crumble and crash down like the surface of a stormy sea. So loud that the teenager couldn't tell if he was listening to his drumming heartbeat, knocking against his ribs, or the metaphorical sound of fear itself. Either way, the freckled one could only watch helplessly as his tainted thoughts poisoned his mind with more ideas. Bakugo struggled for air as he desperately clawed at the sludge in futile agony. The air was being forced out of his lungs, and there was nothing the blonde could do. It was just his luck to get caught in a mess like this, and the teenager was unable to stop his helpless look. The one who caught the pained gaze was none other than Izuku.
Katsuki!
His feet acted on their own. His poisoned mind couldn't keep up. The boy found himself running forward, and the freckled one desperately threw his rucksack at the villain. He had done basic training with Bakugo, but because he didn't want to come close to anyone, the boy had never actually practiced. The bag crashed with some force at the sludge's bulging eyes, and the villain momentarily loosened his grip. The blonde hostage managed to wrench his mouth free as his friend made an attempt to pull him out. The monster tried to tighten around Izuku, but Bakugo let out an explosion from inside, causing the massive goo to miss and slide back. The freckled one never let go of the hand he gripped, and for a moment, it seemed that the human grenade could be free. However, Izuku was simply not strong enough compared to the villain, and within a second, the sludge had pulled his victim back.
Explosions don't affect me.
He distanced himself from the other teenager present, quickly learning that Izuku was a mild threat, but only when up close. As Bakugo started to struggle again, the monster grinned.
Looks like luck isn't on your side, kid.
Izuku didn't move as the words sank in. Luck? The irony of the words could make the quiet kid laugh, and he almost chuckled right there. He never needed his own luck, let alone the luck of others. But the sad reality was that the Greenette's quirk did just that. Life's luck. That was his quirk. A power that subtly changed someone's life so Izuku, alone, didn't face misfortune. The problem was that it meant that anyone within the boy's vicinity, even if it was without malicious intent, was under the quirk's influence. His whole life, the young boy had to just quietly sit and watch as bad luck struck those around him. His power was like a mutant type, as he could never stop the effect, and there hadn't been a day that Izuku hadn't cursed his own luck. He was sick and tired of seeing Inko, his mother who loved and supported him unconditionally, covered in plasters from small, unfortunate incidents. They were all simple accidents, but happened frequently enough that the kind woman resembled a victim of serious abuse. In contrast with the situation, the caring parent still smiled every day, nevertheless, and Izuku hated that the abuse was none other than his presence alone. When word of the freckled one's quirk was told to the other students, many were optimistic at first. The kindergartners would flock around him, but he would get overwhelmed quickly and unconsciously increase the potency of his fate-changing quirk. Misfortune befell his class in the form of a stray bee, and a few stings of those closest to Izuku was enough to scare the children to not approach. Even the adults slowly backed away when the misfortune befell them too, and in the end, not a single person was on the child's side.
I never asked to be lucky!
The yell resonated within Izuku's silent world like violent ripples on a calm lake as his frustration took over. His whirlpool of thoughts spun wildly around as the freckled one took a step forward. For his whole life, he had held his emotions in check out of fear for infecting others with bad luck. But at that moment, the Greenette wanted nothing else but for misfortune to befall the villain. The sludge man made note of the sudden change in demeanor and backed away. But before anything could happen, a figure jumped out of the drainage pipe. A gust of wind blasted forward, and within seconds, the sludge man was all over the floor with Bakugo lying unconscious in the middle.
Katsuki!
Izuku ran forward to tell everyone that this video was sponsored by NordVPN. Staying safe online is an ever-growing difficulty, and hackers could exploit you. NordVPN allows you to change your IP address, making you harder to track, securing your privacy. In addition to providing you with safe passes through the web, you can also expand the reach of your favorite streaming services. Are you tired of going through 2, 3, or even 4 streaming services to watch your favorite anime? Well, with NordVPN, you can change your country and be able to binge the shows like My Hero Academia, Naruto, and many others on your favorite streaming service with just the press of a button. Check out the link in the description to get 72% off when buying 2 years at $3.29 a month. This deal is for a limited time. And thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring this video and letting Izuku help his friend. Completely blinded by his emotions, the freckled one didn't even realize that his idol was scooping the villain into a cola bottle. The blonde teenager was his only friend, and even if they had only been together since the beginning of middle school, it didn't change the fact that Bakugo was someone who wasn't scared of him. At first, the boy had also avoided the Greenette like the others, but after an incident, the blonde had made a drastic change.
Thought we lost you there!
All Might heroically laughed as the human grenade came to, and the loud teenager quickly sprang to his feet. He was nothing more than bruised, but it was enough to get his friend to start brooding. He sighed before reaching to Izuku's notebook and quickly flipped it open to the last page before holding it up to their role model.
Oi, All Might! Can you sign this twice?
The hero beamed brightly before doing so as Izuku unconsciously took a step forward. The man he had admired his whole life was before him, and he wanted to speak up. Unfortunately, his adrenaline rush wasn't over, and at that moment, a car was approaching the number 1 hero. It didn't do much since the hero immediately noticed the vehicle, but the people inside obviously noticed the number 1. Their immediate reaction was like everyone else, and within minutes, people were rushing over for autographs. All Might quickly returned the signed notebook, and the 2 boys managed to escape before crowds formed. Izuku felt as guilty as normal, but his blonde friend grinned.
Think that stupid luck of yours. We got All Might's autograph.
They kept running, and the Green Knight's expression returned to its normal blank look. Bakugo was right, since it was true, and he was happy to see his friend grinning like no tomorrow while chatting about surpassing the number 1. Izuku still hated his quirk with his whole being, but in occasional moments like these, it didn't seem so bad. The written exam was over, and the UA teachers watched the applicants take down robots in their own way. They were nodding in approval over Bakugo rapidly blasting the robots with the quickest efficiency, when Aizawa's tired eyes settled on an absurd sight. On Battleground B, a student was casually walking with an expressionless face. Occasionally, rubble stood in the Green Knight's way, so the teenager kicked it aside. Nezu watched as the debris bounced off a wall before jamming into the knee of a robot, causing it to crash into another and fall behind the freckled one's feet. Do we count that as him earning 3 points?
Yes, I do believe so. It would be illogical not to give him the points, even if he took them by coincidence.
Silence passed as the teachers continued to observe the student, when Nezu spoke up again, saying their thoughts out loud. Except it seems that all his points are coincidental. Perhaps it's not. Could I have his file? The head teacher glanced at the paper before nodding in some sort of understanding. The others gathered before a large range of expressions broke out. Some teachers wondered if the quirk counted as a cheat, while the others felt conflicted. Nezu was more than content to just accept the boy, while Aizawa made an unreadable face. His tired eyes scrutinized the student as thoughts ran through his mind before he decided not to give it any more thought. As for Izuku, the boy absent-mindedly wandered the street as chaos broke out behind him. Earlier, as he and Bakugo walked toward the entrance, the blonde had almost tripped. He managed to catch himself in time, but in trying to help, a brunette girl ended up tumbling to the ground. She awkwardly laughed before running off, and Bakugo sighed.
Wipe that look off your face, Izuku. Your dumbass quirk isn't gonna affect my grade. If it fucks up the others, then they were just not meant to pass.
Silence answered the human grenade, and he couldn't help but feel troubled. In annoyance, he walked a little faster as his calloused hands were roughly shoved into his pockets.
Just go in there and do whatever you want. Take a goddamn walk if you have to. Knowing your luck, you'll fucking pass. There's no point in caring about what others think. We've been training since the beginning of middle school, so you better not give up.
He strode on, and Izuku continued to stare blankly ahead. They didn't exchange a single word since then, but Bakugo had spent the past 3 years learning how to read the tranquility that his friend brought. The silence was all he needed to know, and it was enough. Not everyone agreed to that, though, as the freckled one could recall a taller boy yelling at him minutes ago. Their robotically moving arms had harshly cut through the air as they lectured him about not concentrating on a day so important. In the end, they walked off when they saw that the Green Knight had refused to answer and went back to their thoughts. Another giant explosion broke out before Izuku's feet, as he was given the points off 3 two-pointers that collided with each other when a giant robot suddenly appeared on the other side of the battleground. It was too far away for Izuku to be harmed as his aimless walk had taken him to a safe spot, and the boy just kept racking up the marks. Applicants could be heard screaming from even where he was, and in the end, the exam ended when the 0-pointer was forcefully stopped by the principal. No one was seriously injured since Nezu had stopped the robot, and Recovery Girl made her way around to tend to students. The freckled one was completely unharmed as usual, and silently exited the practical exams to meet Bakugo and return home. Despite the pressure slowly accumulating during the waiting period, neither of the two boys were fazed, and they patiently waited for Bakugo's letter, since Izuku's had come first. When it did, the boys decided to open them at the same time in different rooms, and as a result, an explosive cheer echoed out from Bakugo's room. Mitsuki came running up the stairs as Izuku came down, also with good news as he had passed with over-average scores. The blonde mother congratulated the two loudly before telling everyone to eat a celebratory dinner. The holiday quickly came to an end, and the two boys found themselves walking through the ridiculously tall door of 1A. They had arrived early as usual to Bakugo's schedule, and seated themselves by the windows. As the human grenade leaned back to place his feet on his desk, Izuku leaned forward and pretended to fall asleep at his desk. He believed that no one would come near him, since they seemed unapproachable, but it was proven wrong when another student entered the class. He immediately came over to tell the two of them off, but both boys continued to ignore him. In the end, Bakugo started to yell at the blue-haired newcomer, but apparently it wasn't enough. Ida, as he introduced himself, continued to lecture them to act properly when he attempted to wake Izuku up. Reaching to shake the greenet's shoulder, a sudden crash resonated out around the classroom. The freckled one slowly raised his head to see that Kaminari, a blond boy who was leaning on a desk nearby, had slipped and ended up colliding with the one who wore glasses before any contact was made with him. Ida was getting increasingly annoyed, since there wasn't any order to be seen anywhere, but before he could say any more, the door slid open. No one spoke as a giant, yellow caterpillar slid halfway in before metamorphosing into a 30-year-old man. No one spoke as he told people to sit down, and after a few seconds, he introduced himself as Aizawa Shota, their homeroom teacher. No one knew what to say as he told them to get changed, and within a few minutes, they were all standing outside for a surprise quirk assessment. "You can't just expel us! We just made it in!" A familiar brunette voiced her opinion, but it was quickly met with their teacher's icy stare. He explained how a hero's life wasn't easy, and everything was unfair. Since no one was allowed to complain, the test started.
Die!
Bakugo continued to scream as loudly as he could while completing the test, and at the very end, Izuku found himself holding a softball. He had given his physical best in all the tests, and this was one of the last. Reaching back, he threw it as hard as he could when a sudden gust of wind blew through and carried the ball almost as far as Bakugo's score. "That's not fair!" Some students voiced their thoughts, and Ida once again stepped forward with his opinion.
"You again, please take this seriously! You have been spacing out from the moment I have met you. This hero course is for those who strive to do their best, yet I haven't seen you do anything that's more than the basics. If you're not serious about being a hero, then why are you here?"
Bakugo was about to step forward when Aizawa intervened by sticking out his arm. He glanced at Izuku, who remained unfazed, and sighed deeply before tossing over another ball. "Hey kid, he's right. I said to do your best. Stop holding yourself back and try seriously. I'll take care of the repercussions. I don't care that you're 18th. You'll be the one expelled if you hold back." Ida's arms waved up and down as Izuku's expressionless face started to change. Bakugo braced himself for the worst as Ida continued to speak. It seemed that he was voicing the class's opinion since the students behind him let out murmurs of agreement. The pressure was finally sinking in for the freckled one, and the first expression he made for everyone was fear. A strong wind was starting to blow again, and the homeroom's teacher started to raise slightly. To his annoyance, the wind continued to blow when the teacher sighed as the ball was carried even further than the last. "It's like the invisible one's quirk. It can't be erased." There were a couple of concerned yells as stray branches from nearby trees came crashing over, barely missing some of the students as they were carried by the air currents. Some voices wondered if Izuku's quirk was poorly trained wind manipulation, but the homeroom teacher knew better. He wasn't sure how to assess the student before him. On one hand, the freckled boy had simply gotten lucky, and did astonishingly well for an average throw. But on the other hand, the boy's quirk was luck itself. In the end, he just sighed again before throwing one last ball at the greenet. "I'll give you one more chance. Hold yourself back as you had earlier, and use anything in the vicinity at your disposal." It seemed like an odd proposal, but there was reason behind the strange demand. In response, Izuku nodded before taking a deep breath, letting his emotions drain away, and returning to the blank-faced freckled boy that everyone knew. It unsettled many how quickly he could change his demeanor, but shook it off as the students approached their homeroom teacher. Pointing to his neck, the greenet signaled that he wanted the man's scarf, and the tired one complied, taking the material off. Determined hands gripped the fabric as one would with a couple of years of experience, and Aizawa found himself surprised. From the way his student handled his scarf, he could estimate that Izuku had had at least a year of practice with the item. What's more, it intrigued the man that the boy had then followed a movement pattern similar to his own. Within the next moment, the ball was slingshot across the field to a distance the seasoned hero had achieved back when he was in his second year of high school. Tell me something. Izuku silently returned his scarf, and the teacher returned the fabric to its place around his neck. Why would you learn how to fight quirkless when you have a quirk that could get you through life without trying? Surprised whispers broke out from the class as Aizawa said this, but as usual, the greenette stood there in silence. After a moment, he spoke. Saving a life takes more than luck. I don't want to ever rely on this quirk. It makes someone smile by my own means. It was the ideal answer for the usually grumpy homeroom teacher, and the 30-year-old found himself grinning widely at the class. Deciding to call his expulsion threat a logical ruse, the class was taken back inside, and at the end of the day, they were all dismissed. The teacher watched as Izuku walked out with Bakugo by his side and sighed. He disliked how a hero's strength was determined by a quirk's strength, like All Might's, and liked that he finally had a student who saw the real side. The only problem was that to know the harsh reality meant Izuku must have witnessed the real world through his own eyes. A memory flashed through the underground hero's mind when he sighed heavily once again. He's grown. Thank you all for sticking around, and I hope you enjoyed that. Before you leave, we would just like you to know that we the Celestials have many other channels for your entertainment and viewing purposes. All the information you'll need is right below here in the description, so feel free to check out the other incredible projects our team creates. Secondly, on behalf of we the Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details will be in the description below. That's all for today, so goodbye and have a divine day.